Crabtree Falls Trail was supposed to be an escape, a solo hike to clear my head on a perfect October afternoon. But the deeper I went, the more the woods felt like they were watching me, waiting for me to take one wrong step off the path and into a darkness that had been hungry for a very long time. You're listening to ASMR for 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the Crabtree Falls trailhead in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. It was October 29th, a Tuesday. I remember pulling into the gravel parking lot right around 2:37 in the afternoon. The sky was that kind of pale, washed-out blue you only seem to get in late autumn. Like the color was leaking out of the world and the sun was already dipping behind the ridge line, casting these long, cold shadows that made the whole place feel empty and closed up, even though the sign said the park was open until sunset. My car was the only one there, which was weird for a weekday. I figured maybe a Tuesday afternoon. Just a slow time, but it still felt off. You know, that little prickle on the back of your neck when a place that's supposed to have people just doesn't. I've been needing to get out of the city, just a day to myself to clear my head. No phone service, no emails, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch. Leaves under my boots. I'd packed a decent kit, a 3-liter hydration bladder, my Osprey day pack stuffed with the usual stuff, a first aid kit, some high protein bars, a headlamp with fresh batteries, a light rain jacket, even one of those emergency whistles my mom gave me that I always make fun of but never actually take out of the pack. The trail is supposed to be one of the best in the state, a real showstopper. The series of cascading waterfalls instead of just one big drop in a well-maintained loop that's not too brutal a climb. I read about it online. A bunch of hiking forums said it was a must-do, especially in the fall with the leaves changing, and I could see that. Even from the parking lot, the mountains were on fire with color. Deep reds and bright yellows, like someone had taken a brush to the trees. It was beautiful, sure, but in a quiet way, a lonely way. The air had that crisp bite to it that smells of decaying leaves and cold stone. And as I got out of my car, the sound, the door closing, echoed way too loud in the silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket pressing down on everything. I shrugged it off, though told myself I was being silly, just a city kid not used to the real woods. I laced up my boots tight, did a final check of my pack, and walked over to the big trailhead map. Bolted to a kiosk. The wood was dark and weathered. The plastic covering the map was scratched and foggy with age, but the path seemed straightforward enough. A main trail following the waterfalls up, and then a return loop through the woods. To bring you back to the start, I took a picture of the map with my phone just in case. Even though I knew I wouldn't have service to look at it later, it was a habit, a little ritual that made me feel prepared. And with one last look around the empty parking lot, I started walking. The first part of the trail was wide and gentle, a well-trodden path of packed earth and roots that wound its way into the forest. The sound of the water started almost immediately, a distant rushing that grew louder with every step. And the further I got from the car, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. The trees were mostly oak and poplar, their branches stretching over the path like a canopy, and with the sun going down, the light took on a strange filtered quality. coming through in dusty golden shafts that didn't really warm anything up. I remember checking my watch. It was to 51 and I was making good time. The trail began to climb a bit, following alongside the creek that fed the waterfalls. And the sound of the water was really roaring now, a constant white noise that filled my head. I passed a couple of wooden observation decks built out over the water for viewing the first real cascade. I stopped for a minute to take it in. The water was churning white and powerful, crashing down over mossy brown rocks. The air was full of a fine cold mist that felt good on my face. I had my phone out, trying to get a picture, but the light was tricky and the mist was fogging up the lens. And that's when I heard it, the first thing that was really truly off. It wasn't a scary sound. Not at first. It was just a voice, but it was wrong because it was a child's voice singing, and it was coming from up the trail further ahead. Not from the parking lot behind me. The sound of it wove in and out of the noise of the waterfall. A little nursery rhyme tune, but the words were all slurred and wrong. Like the kid had a mouth full of marbles or something. I lowered my phone and just listened, straining to hear over the water, and yeah, there it was again, a high-pitched little voice singing Ring Around the Rosie, but it sounded like Wing a Wonder Wosie, and it was getting closer. No, it was staying the same distance away. I took a few steps forward up the trail, peering into the trees, but I couldn't see anyone. The singing stopped then, and the only sound was the water, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. I stood there for a full minute, maybe, to just listening, my heart beating a little too fast in my chest, and I almost called out hello, but something stopped me. The absolute emptiness of the place, the feeling that a hello would be swallowed up by the woods. Something else might answer instead, so I didn't. I just started walking again, a little faster. Now my boots cuffing on the path, and I told myself it was probably just the water playing tricks on my ears, the sound of the wind through the leaves. My imagination getting the better of me because I was alone, but the feeling of being alone was gone now, and the feeling of being watched was starting to take its place. I kept hiking, trying to shake off the weird feeling from that little voice. The trail got steeper, switching back and forth on itself as it climbed alongside the waterfalls. The views were incredible, honestly. Each turn revealed a new cascade, more powerful and more beautiful than the last, the water crashing down into deep, clear pools that looked black and bottomless from the overlooks. The mist was thicker up here, to hanging in the air like a cold, wet ghost, and it beaded up on my jacket. On the straps of my backpack, I checked my watch again, 3:22. The sun was definitely losing its fight with the mountain ridge, and the light was getting dimmer, taking on a gray and blue tone that made the vibrant fall colors look muted and dull. I was completely alone on the trail. I hadn't passed a single soul since I left the parking lot, and that was starting to feel less like a blessing and more like a problem. The silence between the bursts of waterfall noise was deeper now, more profound, and every little sound I made, my foot snapping a twig, the rustle of my pack, seemed to be absorbed by it almost immediately, like the forest was a soundproof room. I was the only thing in it. I was coming up on another one of those wooden observation platforms. This one was bigger, jutting out further over the creek to give a better view of the biggest waterfall, yet the one the whole trail was named, for I could feel like a light rain and I had to pull my hood up. As I walked out to the railing, the view was breathtaking. The water just poured over a cliff of jagged rock maybe 100 feet tall, crashing into pool below with a force that sent up a continuous spray that coated everything. I stood there for a while just watching the raw power of it, feeling the vibration in my bones. It was almost enough to make me forget the creeping unease that had been following me since I heard that singing, almost but not quite. Because as I turned to leave the platform and continue up the trail, I saw something carved into the wooden railing. It was fresh. The wood inside the carving was pale and bright, not weathered like the rest of the platform, and it wasn't a heart or initials like you usually see. It was a series of symbols, a circle with a cross coming out of the bottom like an upside down piece, signed next to a bunch of straight lines that looked like they were supposed to be tally marks, but there were too many of them grouped together, and they were all cut deep and angry into the wood. I ran my gloved finger over the grooves, feeling how new it was, and a shiver went down my spine. That had nothing to do with the cold mist. Someone had been here recently, and they'd taken the time to carve this weird, ominous thing, and I hadn't passed anyone on the trail, which meant they were either ahead of me or they came from the other direction. But the parking lot was empty. My car was the only one. The logic of that didn't add up. It made my skin crawl. I pulled my hand back like the wood had burned me and took a step away from the railing, turning to head back to the main trail. And that's when I saw the first one, a little pile of rocks right in the middle of the path. It was too organized to be random. Someone had stacked them carefully, maybe 7 or 8 river stones balanced on top of each other in a shaky pillar. It was a cairn. Hikers use them to mark trails sometimes, but this was right in the middle of a clear, well-defined path. There was no reason for it. It was just sitting there, a little monument about knee-high, and as I looked at it, I noticed something else tucked into the rocks, a small piece of white fabric, maybe from a t-shirt. It was clean to not dirty or faded by weather. It looked like it had just been placed there. I glanced around. The woods were still and quiet except for the ever-present roar of the waterfall. The mist seemed to curl around the trees like fingers, and the light was fading faster now, leaching the color out of the world. I thought about kicking the pile over just to be contrary to whatever weirdness this was, but something held me back, a superstitious fear that it would be a bad idea to touch it. So I just stepped around it and kept walking, my pace quicker now, less of a leisure hike and more of a determined march. I wanted to get to the top of the loop and start heading back down towards the car, towards something that felt like civilization. The trail narrowed after the big waterfall, becoming more of a dirt track. The roots and rocks trying to trip me up. The sound of the water started to fade behind me, replaced by the crunch of my footsteps and the sound of my own breathing, which was getting heavier from the climb. I was so focused on the path in front of me, watching my footing, that I almost didn't see the second one. Another cairn. This one was bigger with more stones, and this one had a child's small sneaker perched on top of it, a little blue and pink shoe just sitting there like it was on display. The shoe was wet, muddy. One of the laces was missing, and it looked so small and so utterly out of place here in the deep woods that it stopped me dead in my tracks. My heart did a little stutter step in my chest. What the hell was a kid's shoe doing all the way out Here and why was it on top of a pile of rocks? The silence around me felt heavier now, pressing in. The absence of the waterfall's roar was suddenly very obvious, and in that silence I heard it again, the singing, that same little off-key voice. It was closer this time, much closer, and it wasn't singing Ring Around the Rosie. It was singing Row, row, row your boat, but the words were all wrong. It sounded like whoa, whoa, whoa your boat, and it was coming from just around the next bend. In the trail my blood went cold. I stood there, frozen, my hand gripping the strap of my backpack so tight my knuckles ached. The voice kept singing, whoa, whoa, whoa your boat, Jen, lie down the stream. It was a little girl's voice, I was sure of it now. But it was all wrong, the cadence was off. It would speed up and slow down, and there was a wet, gurgling quality to it, like the singer was drowning and trying to sing at the same time. I should have called out. I should have said, is someone there, or are you okay? But every instinct in my body was screaming at me to be silent, to not let whatever that was know. I was here. The singing stopped abruptly, cut off, as if someone had put a hand over the singer's mouth. The following silence was even worse. It was complete and total. Not even a bird chirped, not even the wind in the leaves. I didn't move, I barely breathed. I just stood there on the trail, listening and waiting for what felt like an eternity. And then from the same direction, just around the bend, I heard a new sound, a soft rhythmic scratching sound, like someone dragging a stick along the bark of a tree. Over and over again, the scratching sound was steady and methodical, like someone was patiently marking something on a tree trunk, or maybe sharpening a stick. It was a dry, sinister sound that seemed to scrape right against my nerves. I didn't want to go forward. I didn't want to see what was making that sound, but going back meant going back past the cairns, and the shoe and the observation deck with its creepy carving, and the light was fading fast. The thought of being on this trail in the dark was suddenly the most terrifying thing I could imagine, so I made a decision. It was stupid, I know that now, but in the moment it felt like the only choice I had. I would move forward, but I would go off the trail. I bushwhack parallel to the path and bypass whatever was around that bend. I'd reconnect with the trail further up. I pushed my way into the undergrowth to the right of the path. The woods were thick with thorny bushes and fallen logs, but I moved as quietly as I could, my heart hammering against my ribs. The scratching sound continued behind me, not getting any louder or softer. Just that same relentless scrape, scrape, scrape. I moved maybe 20, 30 yards off the trail, keeping it just in sight on my left through the trees. It was slow going, and branches kept snagging on my clothes and pack, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. I could still hear the scratching, and now I started to hear the voice again, not singing this time, but talking. It was too far away to make out the words, just the high-pitched lilting tone of a child having a one-sided conversation. And then a laugh, a bright, bubbly giggle that should have been innocent, but in that context, surrounded by all that silence and strangeness, it was utterly horrifying. I tripped over a hidden root and went down hard on one knee, a sharp pain lancing through my leg. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, and stayed there on the ground for a second, listening. The scratching had stopped, the talking had stopped. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears, and they heard me. I slowly, painfully got back to my feet. My knee was throbbing and my jeans were torn, but I could still walk. I had to keep moving. I pushed on another 10 yards, and then I saw something through the trees, a flash of color that wasn't autumn leaves. It was a bright synthetic pink. I crouched down behind a wide oak tree and peered around it, and my breath caught in my throat. There was a small clearing up ahead, not a natural one. It looked like someone had torn out the bushes and smaller trees to create a circular space, and in the center of that space was a figure. It was a little girl. She was wearing a yellow raincoat with ducks on it and pink rain boots. One boot was missing and her sock was muddy. She had her back to me, and she was bent over something on the ground. I couldn't see what it was. She was humming that same off-key nursery rhyme, and her head was bobbing side to side, and then she stood. And I saw what she was doing. She was making another cairn. This one was huge, almost as tall as she was, a teetering pyramid of stones, and she was placing things on it, not just rocks, and a handful of dark feathers that she carefully arranged. On the top, then a cracked smartphone, then a pair of broken glasses. She was decorating it like it was a Christmas tree or a shrine, and the whole time she kept humming that tune. And then she turned around. She had a stick in her hand, a long pointed one, in her face. It was pale and her eyes were dark holes, but her mouth was stretched into a wide, impossibly wide smile. It wasn't a natural expression. It looked like her cheeks might split, and she was looking right at my hiding spot. She couldn't have seen me. I was deep in shadow behind the tree, but she was staring directly at me. And she stopped humming, and that smile never wavered, and she slowly raised one hand, not the one with the stick, and she curled her fingers in a little "come hither" wave, and she spoke. Her voice was that same wet gurgle, but now it was clear as a bell. She said, "I found you. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I turned. I ran. I crashed back through the undergrowth, blindly, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin branches whipping against my face. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just had to get away. I had to get back to the trail." I burst out onto the path 100 yards or so further up from where I'd left it. I didn't look back. I just started running up the trail, my backpack bouncing painfully against my back, my lungs burning with the cold air and the effort. I could hear something behind me now, not running, but walking a steady, unhurried pace, and the sound of that little voice laughing, a happy, carefree laugh that echoed through the trees around me, as if it was coming from everywhere at once. I ran until my legs felt like jelly. My chest was on fire. I had to stop. I leaned against a tree, gasping for air, and risked a look back down the trail. It was empty and silent. The fading light made everything look murky and indistinct. There was no sign of her, no yellow raincoat, no little girl. I listened for the laughter, for the footsteps, nothing, just my own ragged breathing in the gentle rustle of leaves. Then I noticed the tree I was leaning against. I pulled my hand away from the bark and looked at it. Someone had carved the same symbol into it, the circle with the cross hanging down, and next to it a fresh set of those tally marks. The wood was still oozing sap. It was sticky on my gloves. I pushed myself away from the tree in a panic, and that's when I realized I had no idea where I was. The trail here didn't look right. It was narrower, more overgrown than it should have been according to the map I'd seen, and the light was almost gone. The sun had set behind the mountains, and the world was plunged into a deep twilight of blues and purples. I was lost. I was deep in the woods with something That wasn't a little girl, and night was coming on fast. I fumbled in my pack for my headlamp, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the strap adjusted. I turned it on, and the bright lead beam cut through the gloom a tiny circle of safety. That felt desperately inadequate. I had to keep moving. I had to find the main trail marker or something. I started walking again, my pace a fast, nervous shuffle. The beam of my headlamp bouncing ahead of me, illuminating the path and the trees that pressed in on either side. Every shadow looked like a small figure standing there. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like a footstep behind me. I was so focused on what was behind me that I almost walked right into it. Another cairn, this one was, blocking the entire path, a wall of stones and stacked branches, and tied to the top of it to what looked like vines was a jacket, an adult-sized North Face jacket. It was ripped and stained with dark patches that looked like mud or maybe something else, and below it, hanging from a branch, was my emergency whistle, the one my mom gave me, the one that had been in the front pocket of my backpack. The sight of my own whistle hanging there like some kind of grisly trophy sent a jolt of pure ice water through my veins. How did it get there? It was in my pack, zipped in a pocket. I hadn't taken it out. I hadn't even opened that pocket since I left the car. My mind was reeling, scrambling for some kind of rational explanation and finding nothing. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. I took a step back from the cairn, my headlamp beam shaking as my hands trembled. The little silver whistle spun slowly in the faint breeze, and for a second I thought I saw dark smudges on it, like small fingerprints. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to go near that structure, but the path was completely blocked. The wall of rocks and branches was too high to climb over without dismantling it, and the woods on either side were a tangled mess of thorns and deadfall. Going back was not an option. Going back meant going towards her. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reached out a shaking hand and grabbed the whistle. The metal was cold against my skin, and I yanked it off the branch. The vine snapped with a dry crack that echoed way too loud in the silence. I shoved the whistle deep into my jeans pocket, as if hiding it could undo whatever had just happened. And then I started tearing at the cairn. Wasn't careful or quiet anymore. I was desperate. I grabbed rocks and threw them into the woods. I snapped branches and tossed them aside, my breath coming in ragged white puffs in the cold air. The work was hard. The stones were heavy and wedged and tight, and the whole thing felt unstable, like it might topple over on me. As I pulled a large, flat rock from the center of the pile, I uncovered something else. Something that made me freeze all over again. Nestled in the dirt behind where the rock had been was a small, handmade doll. It was crudely stitched together from what looked like old burlap sacks stuffed with leaves or straw. It had no face, just a blank, white expanse of fabric for a head, but pinned to its chest was a little piece of paper. A photograph. I leaned closer, my headlamp illuminating it, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me. It was a selfie I'd taken in my car just before I got out. I was smiling, looking at the camera, but the trailhead sign visible in the background through the windshield. How was this possible? Who could have taken this from my phone and printed it? Who could have put it here? The sheer impossibility of it was a physical weight on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. I reached down and snatched the doll, tearing the photo from its chest. Paper was crisp and new, the image clear. I crumpled it in my fist, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I shoved the doll and the crumpled photo into my pack, not knowing what else to do with them. I went back to destroying the cairn with a renewed, frantic energy fueled by pure terror. I finally cleared enough of a space to squeeze through, scraping my side against the remaining rocks as I pushed past. I didn't look back. I just started running again. My headlamp beam a frantic bouncing disco ball in the overwhelming darkness. The trail began to slope upwards more steeply, and I realized I must be getting closer to the top of the loop, to the ridge line. I thought that would make me feel better to be on high ground, but it didn't. The trees were thinner here, more skeletal, their bare black branches clawing at the night sky, and the wind picked up a low, mournful moan that sounded far too much like that distorted singing. I kept running, my legs burning, my knees screaming in protest from my earlier fall. I had to find a place to hide, to wait for sunrise. This was no longer about finishing the hike. This was about survival. I saw a large rock formation up ahead to the right of the trail, a jumble of boulders that looked like it might have a small cave or an overhang, where I could get out of the wind and out of sight. Left the path and scrambled up towards the rocks, my headlamp beam scanning wildly for any sign of movement, any flash of yellow. I found a decent spot, a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. It was tight, but I could squeeze into the back of it. It was sheltered from the wind and mostly hidden from view. I slid into the space, my back against the cold stone. I finally let myself slump down. I turned off my headlamp, plunging myself into absolute, utter blackness, the kind of dark you only find deep in the woods on a moonless night. I could see nothing, not my hand in front of my face, nothing. Listen, my ears straining against the silence. The wind sighed through the trees. Branch creaked somewhere, but there were no footsteps, no laughing, no singing. I sat there for what felt like hours, curled into a ball, my arms wrapped around my knees. Shaking from adrenaline and the cold, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake. A sound had pulled me from a fitful, terrified sleep. It was a new sound, not the wind, not a branch. It was a voice. But it was different this time. It was an adult man's voice, and it sounded close. Hello. Voice called out. It sounded normal, concerned. Is someone out there? I'm a ranger. I saw your light. Relief flooded through me so powerfully it made me dizzy. A ranger. An actual person. I fumbled for my headlamp, my numb fingers. Struggling with the switch, I finally got it on and shone it out of my crevice here. I called out, my voice hoarse and cracked. I'm over here. I scrambled out of my hiding spot. Standing up on shaky legs, I shone my light towards the direction of the voice, and I saw him. A man in a green ranger's jacket standing about 30 yards away on the trail. He had a powerful flashlight in his hand, and he shone it towards me. The beam was blinding after the total darkness Yes, are you alright, miss? He called, his voice calm and professional. You shouldn't be out here after dark. I almost cried. I started walking towards him, stumbling over the uneven ground. Thank God, I said, my voice breaking. There's someone else out here, a little girl, but she's not. She's not right. And there are these piles of rocks, and she had my picture. I was babbling, tears of relief streaming down my cold cheeks as I got closer to him. He didn't move, just stood there with his flashlight pointed at me. Little girl, he said, his voice still calm to calm. Can you describe her? I was almost to the trail now, just 10 feet away. Yeah, she had a yellow raincoat, the ducks on it, and pink boots, but she only had one boot on, and her face. I trailed off as my headlamp beam finally reached him, illuminating the lower half of his body. He wasn't wearing hiking boots or ranger's pants. He was wearing dark, soaked-looking jeans. And his shoes, they were mismatched. One was a work boot caked in mud. The other was a small, big rain boot, and in his hand, the hand that wasn't holding the flashlight, he was holding a long, sharp-looking stick. He slowly lowered the flashlight from my face, and I saw he wasn't a ranger. He was a man with a gaunt, pale face and a wide, stretched smile that was exactly like the girl's. A smile that looked like it hurt, and his eyes were dark and empty. She's right here, he said, his voice dropping into a wet, gurgling whisper that was horrifyingly familiar, and he stepped aside, and the little girl in the yellow raincoat stepped out from behind him. She was holding his hand, and she looked up at me, her head tilting to one side, her own smile widening impossibly, and she waved her free hand at me, her fingers curling slowly, and the man raised the sharp stick, pointing it at me, and took a step forward. The world just kind of narrowed down to that one point. The sharpened end of that stick aimed right at my chest, and the two of them standing there wearing those identical terrible smiles that didn't reach their dead eyes. My body just reacted. Before my brain could even process the horror of it, I turned and I ran back into the blackness of the woods, not towards the rocks I just left. It was a dead end. I just ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, my headlamp beam jerking and bouncing wildly, illuminating nightmare snapshots of grasping branches and uneven ground. I could hear them behind me, not running, just walking. But their footsteps were steady and relentless, and the man's voice called out, not yelling, just talking in that same calm, conversational tone that was now the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. It's easier if you just stop now, he said, his voice cutting through the night air like a knife. The woods don't like it when you run. It upsets them. And then the little girl's voice joined in, not singing, but repeating his words in a sing-song parody. Upsets them, upsets them. I didn't look back. I just pumped my arms and legs harder, my lungs burning with the cold, my torn knees screaming in agony with every step. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to put distance between me and them. The terrain started to slope downwards sharply, and I lost my footing on a patch of wet leaves. My feet went out from under me, and I landed hard on my back, the air whooshing out of me. My headlamp flickered, and for one heart-stopping second, it died. plunging me into absolute blackness. I slapped at it frantically and it sputtered back to life, a weaker, yellower being now, but light. I scrambled to my feet, my back aching, and I listened. I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. I couldn't hear their voices, just the wind and the frantic beat of my own heart. Had I lost them, I stood there for a full minute, maybe two, trying to quiet my breathing, straining my ears for any sound. Nothing. Maybe I had actually lost them. The relief was short-lived because as I stood there, I realized the woods around me had changed. The trees were different. They were older, bigger, with twisted, gnarled trunks that looked like they'd been here for 1,000 years. And they were covered in carvings, not just one or two, but dozens upon dozens of them. The same symbol, the circle with the dangling cross, and next to them those tally marks. They were carved into every available surface, deep and old. Some so weathered they looked like they'd been there for decades. And beneath one particularly large, grotesque oak tree, there was a whole collection of things. A small clearing of offerings. There were more children's shoes, 12 pairs at least, all small, all muddy and worn. There were jackets, backpacks, a pair of crutches, a camera with a broken lens, all arranged carefully around the base of the tree like some bizarre shrine. And hanging from the lowest branch by a frayed piece of rope was a park ranger's hat, the brim stained dark. I felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just some random crazy people. This was something else. Something that had been here a long, long time. I heard a twig snap to my left and I spun around. My weakened headlamp beam cutting a pathetic swath through the darkness. Nothing was there. Then another snap to my right, closer. I started backing away from the tree, from the awful collection of lost things. My foot hit something soft. I looked down and my light illuminated a stuffed animal. Brown teddy bear. It was filthy and wet. One of its button eyes was missing. It was sitting propped up against a tree root as if someone had placed it there, just for me to find a gift. A wave of nausea washed over me and I stumbled backwards, turning to run again, and I saw them. They weren't chasing me, they were just standing there, at the edge of the circle of my fading light, the man and the little girl. They were just watching me, their heads tilted in unison, their smiles still firmly, horrifyingly in place, and behind them I saw other figures, shadows that resolved into more people, a woman in a ripped floral dress, her hair matted with leaves, an older man in overalls missing one of his boots, a teenager in a letterman's jacket that was caked in mud, maybe 5 or 6 of them in total, standing perfectly still among the ancient trees, all of them looking at me with the same empty, smiling faces. They were surrounding me. They had been herding me here to this place. This was where they wanted me. The little girl took a step forward. She lifted her hand and pointed past me, deeper into the grove of carved trees, her finger pointing towards a darkness so absolute my light couldn't penetrate it. "He wants to see you," she said, her voice a wet, gurgling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "He's been waiting for a new friend to play with. It gets so lonely down in the dark." The man with the stick nodded slowly. "It's easier if you go willingly," he said, his voice still that awful parody of reason. The old way hurt so much more, and he just so loved the sound. I was trapped completely and utterly. There was nowhere to run. My back was to the giant oak tree with its terrible shrine. My headlamp chose that moment to die completely, the bulb giving one last faint yellow flicker and then going out, leaving me in the perfect, suffocating blackness. I could hear them then, all of them, starting to move forward, their feet shuffling through the dead leaves, a dry, rustling sound that was all around me. Getting closer, and underneath that sound, a new one, a low, rhythmic pounding, like a giant heartbeat coming from deep underground, right beneath my feet. The earth itself seemed to vibrate with it, and from the direction the little girl had pointed, from that pool of absolute blackness, I heard a sound that I can't even properly describe. It was like stone grinding against stone, and a deep, wet inhalation, like something massive and ancient drawing its first breath in 1,000 years. And then a voice that wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a pressure inside my skull that formed words I could understand. It said one word, my name. It didn't say it out loud. It just planted it directly into my mind. And it knew my name, my real name, the one I never use on trails, but one on my driver's license back in the car. And the word was filled with such a profound, aching loneliness and a hungry, greedy desire that I fell to my knees, my hands over my ears, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The things, the people, the smiling family, they were right in front of me now. I could smell them. A scent of wet earth and decay and something coppery like old blood. The little girl reached out her small, cold hand and touched my cheek, her fingers leaving a muddy streak. "Don't be scared," she whispered, her breath smelling of pond water and rot. "You'll get used to the dark. We all did, and then you can help us find more friends for him. He gets so hungry." The pounding from underground grew louder, more insistent, a drumbeat summoning me, and the pressure in my head increased. The voice, the thing, repeating my name over and over, a mantra of ownership. I was done. I was finished. I had nothing left, no fight, no hope. I closed my eyes, waiting for the feel of that sharp stick, waiting to be dragged down into the dark. But then my hand, shoved deep into my jeans pocket to try and stop the shaking, closed around the cold metal of my emergency whistle, my mom's stupid whistle, the one I'd taken off the cairn without even thinking. A last, desperate, pointless act of defiance. I pulled it out and I put it to my lips and I blew with all the air left in my burning lungs. The sound that came out of that little piece of metal was not the feeble peep I expected. It was a shrill, piercing shriek that cut through the oppressive silence like a physical thing. Blade of pure, sharp noise that seemed to shock the very air around me. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The low grinding from the deep blackness ceased. The subterranean pounding heartbeat stuttered and stopped. The pressure in my skull vanished so completely it left a ringing vacuum behind, and the smiling people, the family, they recoiled as if I'd thrown acid on them. The little girl let out a sharp, pain hiss, clapping her hands over her ears, her wide smile finally faltering, twisting into a grimace of agony and surprise. The man with the stick stumbled backwards, dropping his weapon and clutching at the sides of his head. A low moan of anguish escaping his lips, the other figures writhed and stumbled in the darkness, their forms seeming to blur and lose cohesion for a second as if the sound was unraveling them. The sudden absence of that otherworldly presence was so profound it left me gasping. Still on my knees in the dirt, the whistle's echo fading into the trees, replaced by a silence that was just silence, just the wind and the rustle of leaves. No voices, no heartbeat, no crushing psychic weight. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I fumbled in the utter blackness, my fingers finding the whistle again and gripping it like a lifeline. I didn't. Which way to run? I just ran away from them. Away from the giant oak tree and its terrible shrine. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face and arms, my feet slipping on the damp earth. I could hear movement behind me, not the calm, relentless walking from before, but a frantic, disorganized scrambling and voices, not the calm, gurgling tones, but raw, angry shouts that sounded almost human, almost normal in their fury. Stop her, the man's voice roared, stripped of its false reason, now just pure, venomous rage. The sound, she used the sound. Don't let her get away. I didn't look back. I just ran, blowing the whistle in sharp bursts every few seconds, not a continuous blast. Just enough to keep that shield of noise around me, and every time I did, I heard them cry out. In pain and frustration behind me, the sound was my only weapon. My only light in the perfect darkness. My lungs were on fire, my legs were leaden but pure. Animal terror drove me forward. I had no idea where I was going. I was completely disoriented, just running downhill, hoping that down would eventually lead to water, to a road, to something, anything other than this. But what felt like an eternity of blind, panicked flight, my foot caught on a root and went down hard, tumbling head over heels, the world a spinning vortex of blackness and pain. I landed with a jarring thud that knocked the wind out of me. The whistle flying from my lips, I lay there for a second, stunned, gasping for air. The silence rushed back in, thick and heavy, and with it the sound of their pursuit, closer now, much closer, their footsteps crashing through the brush, their angry, panting breaths. I frantically patted the ground around me, my hands scraping over dirt and leaves and cold stone. Where was it? Where was the whistle? My fingers finally closed around the cool metal just as a beam of light cut through the trees above me. My light, a flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. I see her, the man's voice growled. Down in the gully, I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, my back hitting something solid and cold, a rock wall. I was in some kind of shallow ravine, a dead end. The flashlight beam found me, pinning me against the stone, blinding me. I could see their dark shapes silhouetted at the top of the small ridge. 5 of them looking down at me. The little girl pushed to the front, her face once again a mask of that terrible, stretched smile, but her eyes were different now. They were full of a cold, ancient hatred that did not belong on a child's face. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice no longer a gurgle, but a dry, rasping thing like dead leaves skittering across stone. He doesn't like the sharp sounds. It makes his head hurt. And when his head hurts, he makes us hurt. She started to climb down into the gully, her movements unnaturally fluid like a spider descending its web. The others followed, the man in the lead, his stick now replaced with a heavy-looking rock held in his hand. I was trapped, my back against the wall, the whistle clutched in my hand. I brought it to my lips again, but the man was faster. He lunged forward, and his hand, cold and strong as iron, clamped over my mouth, crushing my lips against my teeth, preventing me from blowing the whistle. His other hand, the one holding the rock, came up, poised to strike. His face was inches from mine. His breath smelled of damp soil and something metallic in his eyes. In the reflected light of the flashlight held by one of the others, they weren't empty anymore. They were full of a desperate, trapped terror. Flicker of the man he might have once been, screaming from behind a wall of whatever this was. And in that instant, I understood. They weren't doing this because they wanted to. They were prisoners, just as I was about to become. His arm tensed, ready to bring the rock down on my head, and I did the only thing I could think of. I bit down on the hand over my mouth as hard as I could, my teeth sinking into the cold. Flesh, it didn't feel like biting a person. It felt like biting a root, but he recoiled with a grunt of surprise, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second, and that was all I needed. I sucked in a breath and blew the whistle with every ounce of strength I had left. Right in his face, the sound was deafening at that range. A concentrated blast of sonic pain. He screamed a raw, honest scream of agony and stumbled backwards, clawing at his ears, his eyes wide with real human pain. The others on the ridge above him recoiled, shielding their own ears, their forms. Shuddering, the little girl let out a shriek of pure fury, but she didn't advance. The sound was holding them back, creating a barrier they couldn't cross. I kept blowing, the sound becoming my entire world. A constant, screaming note that was the only thing keeping the darkness and the things in it at bay. I began to sidle along the rock wall, moving sideways, away from them, my eyes fixed on the writhing figures. The man was on his knees now, blood trickling from his ears. The others were backing away up the ridge, their hands pressed to the sides of their heads, their angry shouts turning to cries of pain. I kept moving, one foot after the other, the whistle screaming its relentless note, my lungs burning. My vision starting to spot from the lack of oxygen. I couldn't keep this up forever. I would pass out soon. I had to find a way out. I reached a corner of the rock wall and rounded it, still blowing the whistle, and I saw something, a faint silvery light ahead. Not the yellow beam of a flashlight, but a cool, natural light, moonlight, filtering down through a break in the trees, and beneath it, the glint of water, a stream, and next to the stream, a path, a real, maintained dirt path. I was back. I had found the trail again. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. I pushed off from the rock wall and ran for the path, still blowing the whistle, the sound now ragged and weak, my lungs screaming for air. I stumbled onto the packed earth of the trail and looked back. The things, the family, they had not followed me out of the gully. They stood at the tree line, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, watching me. their forms now just dark shadows against the deeper blackness of the woods. The little girl took one step forward into a patch of silver light, and her face was contorted in a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. She pointed a finger at me, and then she pointed down at the ground by my feet. I looked down, and there, sitting neatly in the middle of the path, was another cairn, this one small. Only 3 rocks, and balanced on top of it was my car key. I was sure was still safely zipped in an inner pocket of my backpack. I stopped blowing the whistle. The sudden silence was roaring, my chest heaving. I stared at the key, then back at her. She smiled then, that wide, terrible smile returning, and she slowly drew her finger across her throat in a universal, unmistakable gesture. Then she and the other shadows melted back into the woods, gone. I was alone on the trail, the moon shining down, the stream gurgling peacefully nearby. I stood there, trembling uncontrollably, every nerve in my body firing. I looked down at the key again, a promise, a threat. They knew where my car was. They knew where I was going. They were telling me I wasn't safe anywhere. I bent down and picked up the key, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I clutched it in my fist, the cold metal biting into my palm, and I started walking down the trail, moving as fast as my battered body would allow, heading downhill, following the water, praying it would lead me back to the parking lot, back to my car, back to the world, the whistle still gripped in my other hand, ready to scream again at the first sign of anything. The normalcy of the trail was somehow more unsettling now after what I'd seen, to what I'd heard, the moonlit trees, the sound of the water. It all felt like a thin veneer, a painted backdrop hiding something vast and ancient and hungry, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that they were still with me, walking just out of sight in the dark between the trees, waiting for me to stop making noise, waiting for me to get tired, waiting for me to finally belong to him. The walk down that moonlit trail was the longest of my life. Every shadow was a crouching figure. Every rustle of leaves was a footfall matching my own. I held the whistle tight in my teeth now, my hands free to catch myself if I fell, my breath still coming in ragged, painful gashes that made it impossible to blow a continuous note. So I just puffed short, sharp bursts into it every few seconds, a frantic, rhythmic clicking that was the only thing keeping the silence and whatever lived in it at bay. My eyes were fixed on the path ahead, desperately searching for any familiar landmark, any sign that I was getting closer to the parking lot, to safety. Key they had left for me felt like a burning coal in my clenched fist, a taunt, piece of their game that I was now forced to play. They wanted me to go to the car. That much was clear. It was the only place I could go, the only hope of escape I had left. So that's where they would be waiting. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. But what other choice did I have? Wander these woods until dawn, if dawn even ever came. In this place until I collapsed from exhaustion and the whistle fell from my lips. No. Car was the only goal, a metal box on wheels that represented the entire normal world. I had to believe I could reach it. I had to believe I could get in and drive away faster than they could stop me. The trail began to look more familiar. The gentle slope, the wider path. I passed the remains of the cairn I had dismantled. The rocks I'd thrown were still scattered in the bushes, a testament to my earlier panic. A little further on, I saw the first wooden observation deck overlooking the lower waterfalls. The water was a silver ribbon in the moonlight, crashing down into the black pool below. Mist felt freezing now, coating my jacket in a fine, icy film. I was getting close. Parking lot couldn't be more than half a mile away. My heart began to beat with a new rhythm, a mixture of terror and desperate hope. I picked up my pace, my battered body protesting with every step. My knee was a hot pulse of agony. My back ached from the fall. My face stung from 100 tiny cuts from branches. But I kept moving, the clicking of the whistle, a frantic metronome counting down the distance. I rounded a final bend in the trail, and there it was, the gravel parking lot. Spread out under the cold light of the moon, and in the very center of it, my car. It looked so normal, so utterly mundane, a dark blue sedan sitting alone in the sea. Gray gravel, a beacon of salvation. I almost sobbed with relief. I took the whistle from my mouth, my jaw aching, and I screamed into the night air. Not a scream of fear, but a scream of defiance, a raw, wordless shout that echoed off the mountains. I started to run towards it, fumbling in my pocket for the key, my fingers numb and clumsy. I was halfway across the parking lot when I saw it, the thing that stopped me dead in my tracks. Surrounding my car in a wide, perfect circle were dozens of cairns, maybe 100 of them, each one a knee-high pile of stones, each one identical to the last. They formed a silent, Stonehenge-like barrier around the vehicle, and sitting on the roof of my car, cross-legged like she was waiting for a picnic, was the little girl. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was just watching me, her head tilted, her yellow raincoat glowing faintly in the moonlight. She held something in her lap, something long and pale. I couldn't make out what it was. I stood there at the edge of this circle of stones, my breath blooming in the cold air, the key digging into my palm. This was it, the final move. They had let me come here. They had herded me here. This was where the game ended. I looked around the empty parking lot. The woods were a solid wall of blackness on all sides, silent and watching. I was alone with her. With it, "You're almost home," the little girl said, her voice flat, devoid of the earlier gurgle or rasp, just a hollow, dead sound. "You just have to come and get in." She patted the roof of the car next to her. "It's waiting for you inside. It's so much quieter in there, no more sharp sounds." I knew I couldn't go through the circle of cairns to touch those stones, would be to accept whatever this was, to step into their world completely. But there was no other way. The car was my only chance. I looked down at the whistle in my hand, my little metal savior. It felt small and insignificant against the vast, ancient silence of this place. I knew if I blew it now, it would hurt her. It would keep her back, but it wouldn't stop what was coming. It would just make it angrier. I made a decision, a crazy, stupid decision born of utter desperation and exhaustion. I took a deep breath, put the whistle to my lips, and I ran, not towards the car, but parallel to the tree line, blowing the whistle as I went. A long, continuous, ear-splitting shriek that shattered the night. I ran along the edge of the parking lot, dragging the sound with me like a curtain. And as I did, I saw them, the others, the family. They emerged from the woods. Just the ones I'd seen before, but more, maybe 10 or 12 figures, men, women, children, all with those same pale, smiling faces, all dressed in clothes from different eras. A woman in a pioneer's dress, a man in a 1950s work shirt. They flinched back from the sound, their hands going to their ears, their smiles twisting into snarls of pain. I was leading them away from the car, creating a distraction, a diversion. I ran to the far end of the parking lot, whistle screaming, my lungs on fire, and then I turned and I threw the whistle. I threw it as hard as I could into the deep woods on the opposite side from my car. I saw the little silver arc of it catch the moonlight before it vanished into the darkness. The sound cut off abruptly, and for 1 second there was perfect, utter silence. And then all of them, every single one of those smiling people, turned as one and surged into the woods after the sound, a silent, frantic wave of movement like hounds after a scent. The little girl on the car roof watched them go, her head turning slowly to follow their progress. And then she turned back to look at me, her expression unreadable from this distance. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I turned and I sprinted for my car, for the circle of cairns. I didn't try to go around. I plowed right through them, kicking stones flying, scattering the carefully balanced piles. The rocks skittering and clattering across the gravel, a sound like breaking bones. I reached the car door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I finally got it and turned it, yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me and hitting the lock button in one frantic motion. The interior light was on, illuminating the familiar, safe space of my car. Fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror, the empty coffee cup in the holder. I sobbed with relief, fumbling to get the key into the ignition. My hands were slick with sweat and blood. I jammed the key in, turned it. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The headlights blazed on, cutting to brilliant white paths through the darkness, illuminating the scattered stones and the empty parking lot beyond. I threw it into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. Tires spun on the gravel for a heart-stopping second before catching, and the car lurched forward. I sped towards the exit, the gravel pinging off the undercarriage. I didn't look back. I just focused on the narrow road ahead, the tunnel. Light my headlights made. I was free. I was out. I had made it. Was maybe 100 yards down the road when I glanced in my rearview mirror. Parking lot was shrinking behind me, a pool of darkness, and standing in the very center of the road, right where the parking lot met the asphalt, was the little girl. She was just standing there watching me go, one hand raised, not in a wave, but held palm out as if telling me to stop. And then my headlights passed over her, and she was gone. I pressed the accelerator harder, the car speeding down the mountain road, taking the curves too fast. My hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. I drove for 10 minutes, 20, putting as much distance between me and that place as I could. The woods began to thin. I saw a house with a light on. Mailbox, signs of normal life. I started to cry then. Great heaving sobs of relief and delayed terror. I was safe, I was out. I had one. I reached down to turn on the heater, to stop the shaking that was racking my whole body, and my fingers brushed against something on the passenger seat, something that shouldn't have been there. I glanced over and my blood froze solid, sitting neatly buckled into the passenger seat, as if it had been there the whole time, was the filthy, one-eyed teddy bear from the shrine in the woods and pinned to its chest with a sharp, thorny twig was a new photograph, a Polaroid. It was a picture of me taken from outside the car, through the driver's side window, just seconds ago. My face was a mask of terrified concentration as I focused on the road, and written beneath the image in shaky, childish letters was a single word: home. The scream that tore out of me wasn't even a sound, it was just air, a silent, breathless shriek of pure, unadulterated horror that locked my lungs and turned my hands to ice on the steering wheel. The car swerved violently, tires screeching on the asphalt, the headlights sweeping across the dark trees in a dizzying arc before I wrestled control back. My heart wasn't beating, it was just a frantic, fluttering bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. I stared at the bear, at the Polaroid, the image of my own terrified face staring back at me from the instant film. The word home scrawled underneath like a sick promise. They were here. They were in the car with me. They had been here the whole time. The victory I'd felt seconds ago was a cruel joke, a tiny taste of hope just to make the despair that followed so much more bitter. Wanted to grab the bear and throw it out the window, but I couldn't make my hands move. I was paralyzed by the sheer impossible violation of it. This was my car, my sanctuary, the last connection to my old life. And they had defiled it. They had been sitting here waiting for me, a part of me, a small, rational part that was rapidly disintegrating, whispered that it was just a toy, just a picture. It couldn't hurt me, but the rest of me knew better. It was a message, a claim. I was not driving away from anything. I was bringing it with me, the interior light of the car, which had felt so safe in normal moments before, now felt like an interrogation lamp, highlighting the grotesque passenger buckled in beside me. I fumbled for the dome light switch and turned it off, plunging the cabin into darkness lit only by the green glow of the dashboard and the twin cones of the headlights. The darkness felt safer. It hid the bear, but it couldn't hide the feeling of its single plastic eye staring at me in the peripheral blackness. I drove faster, pushing the sedan well past the speed limit on the winding mountain road. The trees were a blur on either side. I had to get to a town, to a gas station, to a place with lights and people. I had to get out of this car and away from that thing. I reached for my phone, my hand patting my empty pocket. Then I remembered I'd put it in my backpack when I started the hike. My backpack, which was now on the floor in the back seat. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't take my eyes off the road, not with the way the curves were coming at me, not with the bear sitting there. I kept driving, my knuckles white on the wheel. Every minute felt like an hour. Every shadow in the woods at the edge of my vision looked like a small figure in a yellow coat. The road began to slope downward more steeply. The signs of civilization began to appear. A reflector post, a speed limit sign, then, like a miracle, they glow in the distance, the lights of a small town, a gas station, anything I saw begin, this time with a fragile renewal of hope. I could see an intersection up ahead, a stop sign, a few street lights, a building with a lit sign. It was a closed-down diner, but next to it was a 24-hour convenience store. Its fluorescent lights a beautiful, heavenly beacon. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the empty parking lot, gravel spraying. I killed the engine and sat there for a second, breathing heavily, staring at the bright, normal lights of the store. I could see a clerk behind the counter, a real person, a man in a red vest reading a magazine. I looked at the bear. It was still just a stuffed animal sitting there. I unbuckled my seatbelt with trembling hands. My every instinct screaming at me to get out, to run into that store and never look back. But I had to know. I had to be sure. I reached over, my hand hovering just above the bear. And then I snatched the Polaroid from its chest. The thorny twig pricked my finger, drawing a bead of blood. I ignored it, looking at the photo in the dim green light of the dashboard. It was definitely me. The angle was from outside the driver's side window. My face pale and strained, the timestamp in the bottom corner read 10:14 p.m. It was 10:23 now. This was taken less than 10 minutes ago while I was driving. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I crumpled the photo in my fist and threw it onto the floor. Then I reached for the bear. I grabbed it. Its fur was matted and damp, and I unlocked my door, shoved it open, and stumbled out into the cold night air. I ran across the parking lot, my legs stiff and aching, and yanked open the door to the convenience store. The electronic chime dinged, and the clerk looked up from his magazine, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of me. It must have been a mess, covered in dirt and scratches, my clothes torn, my face streaked with tears and mud. "Oh, lady, you okay?" he asked, setting his magazine down. "You have an accident." I leaned against the door, breathing in the stale, warm air smelling of coffee and disinfectant. I was safe. I was in a building with lights, with another person. The normality of it was almost overwhelming. The bright aisles of chips and candy, the humming coolers full of soda. I need to use your phone," I managed to say, my voice a hoarse croak. "My cell, no service." He gestured to an old corded phone on the counter. "Help yourself. You want me to call the sheriff?" I nodded, grabbing the phone, my hands still shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. 911. It rang twice, and a dispatcher's calm voice answered. 911. "What's your emergency?" "I need help," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I was at Crabtree Falls. There's people in the woods. They chased me. They put things in my car." I was babbling. I knew it, but I couldn't stop. The dispatcher asked for my location, and I gave her the name of the convenience store, my voice rising in pitch. "Please, just send someone now." She said she was dispatching a unit to stay where I was. I hung up the phone and slid down to the floor. I back against the counter, wrapping my arms around my knees. The clerk, whose name tag said Dwayne, came around and offered me a bottle of water here on the house. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, trying to make a joke. His face was kind, concerned. I took the water but didn't open it. Just held the cold plastic against my forehead. "They're real," I whispered. more to myself than to him. They're real and they're still out there, Dwayne nodded. Slowly, the woods around here. Folks tell stories, old stories, he said, his voice low. About things that get lost and don't want to be found. About something old in the mountains that likes to collect. His words sent a fresh chill through me. He believed me, or at least, he believed something was out there. I heard the distant sound of a siren growing closer. Relief washed over me so powerfully it made me dizzy. Red and blue lights flashed through the store's windows. Reflecting off the racks of snacks, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot. Parking next to my car, the deputies got out, a man and a woman. They were calm, professional. They walked towards the store, and I pushed myself to my feet, ready to run to them. To tell them everything, the female deputy glanced into my car. As she passed it, her hand going to her belt. She shone her flashlight through the window, peering inside. Then she looked back at her partner and shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. They came into the store, the electronic chime dinging again. Evening, Dwayne, the male deputy said. Then he looked at me. You the one who called? I nodded, words failing me for a second. They were in the woods. I finally stammered. A man. A little girl. Others. They chased me. They left this in my car. I pointed frantically out the window towards my car. A bear. A teddy bear. It's on the passenger seat, and a picture. They took a picture of me while I was driving. The deputies exchanged a look I recognized instantly, a look of practiced patience. The look you give someone who is confused, or crazy, or drunk. Okay, Mom, the female deputy said gently. Why don't you come outside with us, and we'll take a look, okay? I followed them out, my heart sinking, the cold night air biting at my skin. The male deputy opened the passenger door of my car and shone his flashlight inside. He moved the beam around across the seat, the floor. He looked back at me, his expression neutral. I don't see any bear, ma'am, he said. My blood ran cold. What? No. It was right there, buckled in. I threw it on the floor. I pushed past him and looked inside. The passenger seat was empty. The floor was clean. Nothing but a few old receipts and some dirt. No bear, no crumpled Polaroid, nothing. It was gone. It was there, I whispered, my voice small and broken. I swear it was there. The female deputy put a hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, have you consumed any alcohol or drugs tonight? She asked, her voice still kind but firm, and in that moment, standing there under the fluorescent lights of the gas station with two police officers, who thought I was insane with my empty, normal-looking car sitting beside me, I felt a loneliness so profound it was worse than any fear I'd felt in the woods, because they had one. They had taken my proof. They had made me look like a liar, a crazy person, and I knew, with a certainty that made my soul feel hollow, that they weren't done with me. The game wasn't over. It had just changed venues, and the next move was mine. The look on the deputies' faces was a different kind of horror, a quiet, professional pity that was somehow worse than the smiling emptiness in the woods. The female deputy, her name was Deputy Miller according to the badge, kept her hand on my shoulder. A gesture meant to be comforting that felt like the weight of an anchor pulling me down. "Ma'am, why don't you come sit in the cruiser?" she said, her voice a model of calm control. "It's warm and we can talk this through, get you some help. Help." The words sounded so foreign, so impossible. What kind of help could there be for this? For a thing that could vanish evidence and plant thoughts and take pictures from outside a moving car. I let her guide me to the back seat of the squad car. The plastic seat crackling under me, the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee filling my nose. The male deputy, Deputy Evans, stayed by my car, shining his flashlight through the windows again, then popping the trunk, looking for the bear that wasn't there. For any sign of the struggle I was describing, I saw him shake his head again. A small, definitive motion. The case was closed before it was even opened. Deputy Miller slid into the driver's seat, leaving the partition open. She turned to look at me, her face soft with a concern I knew was genuine but utterly misplaced. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked, pulling out a small notepad. I told her, my voice a monotone. I gave her my address in Richmond, my date of birth, facts of a person who no longer felt entirely real. "And you said you were hiking at Crabtree Falls today," she stated, writing it down. "What time did you start?" I told her about the empty parking lot, about the strange feeling. I left out the singing at first, and the cairns. I knew how it would sound, but as I talked, the story demanded those details. They were the truth, the only truth I had left. So I told her about the little girl's voice, about the piles of rocks, about the man who wasn't a ranger, about the thing in the dark that knew my name. With every word, I saw her face change, the professional mask of concern tightening, her eyes flicking down to her notepad where she was writing less and less. When I mentioned the thing underground, the voice in my head, she stopped writing altogether, just listened, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the static crackle. "The police radio. You've been through a very traumatic experience," Deputy Miller said carefully, choosing her words like she was walking on glass. "Being alone in the woods after dark, it can do things to your mind, play tricks on you. Especially if you fell, hit your head." She gestured to the cut on my forehead I hadn't even known was there. "We can take you to the hospital, get you checked out. Make sure you're okay." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see, but the energy was gone, drained out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. They couldn't help me, no one could. This was between me and the woods now, and it had followed me out. I didn't imagine it. I whispered, but it sounded weak even to my own ears, a plea from a lost child. Deputy Evans got back in the car, sliding into the passenger seat. He glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. "Car's clean," he said to his partner. "No signs of forced injury." "No, toys," he said the word toys with a faint emphasis that made my face burn with shame. Deputy Miller nodded. "We're going to take you to the hospital, okay?" she said. "It wasn't a question, just to get you looked at, then we can figure out the next steps." I didn't argue. What was the point? The cruiser pulled out of the parking lot, leaving my car behind, a silent monument to my madness. I watched the convenience store lights shrink in the side mirror. Dwayne the clerk was standing in the doorway watching us go, his face a pale moon under the fluorescent glow, and for a second, thought I saw a small figure in a yellow raincoat standing next to him. But then we turned a corner, and it was gone. The hospital was a 30-minute drive, 30 minutes of silence in the back of the police car, 30 minutes to replay every insane second of the night. To feel the crushing weight of my own isolation, the deputies didn't speak to me. They talked in low tones to each other about a high school football game, about their shifts, about normal things that belonged to a world I was no longer part of. We arrive at a small county hospital, a low brick building with a bright emergency room sign. Deputy Miller walked me inside, her hand on my elbow, a polite, firm grip that made sure I didn't wander off. There was quiet. A few people sitting in plastic chairs, looking tired and bored. A nurse behind a desk looked up as we came in, her eyes flicking from me to the deputy, a well-practiced assessment. This is... Deputy Miller started, then realized she'd never actually asked my name. I'm sorry. What was your name again? I told her, and she relayed it to the nurse. She was found disoriented near the Crabtree Falls area. Possible fall, possible psychological episode, she said, her voice low, but I heard every word. Psychological episode. The words landed like physical blows. The nurse nodded, her face neutral. Have a seat. We'll get to you soon. Deputy Miller led me to a chair. I have to get back to patrol, she said, but you're in good hands here. Just tell them what you told me, okay? They'll help you. She gave my shoulder a final pat and walked away, her boots echoing on the linoleum floor. And just like that, I was alone again, surrounded by people, but more alone than I had been in the woods, because here, my truth was a symptom, a sign of a broken mind. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the clock tick, listening to the beep of machines and the quiet murmurs of the staff. Every time the automatic doors hissed open, my heart would leap into my throat, expecting to see a pale, smiling face peering in. But it was always just a nurse or a coughing child or an old man with a cane. The normal world moving in its normal way, oblivious to the war happening inside my head. A different nurse finally called my name, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. She led me back to a curtained-off bay, took my vitals, asked me the same questions the deputy had. I gave her the same answers, watching her face for any sign of belief, any flicker of recognition. But there was none, just professional detachment. The doctor will be in shortly, she said, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around my arm. He might want to do a CT scan, given your confusion and the head trauma. She left me alone then. Curtain swishing shut behind her, I sat on the edge of the bed. Paper sheet crinkling under me, the smell of bleach and sickness filling my lungs. I looked at my hands. They were still dirty, ground in dirt under my nails. A tangible piece of the woods I'd brought with me, proof that I had been there, that it was real. And then I saw it on the floor, tucked just under the wheel of the blood pressure machine, a small gray river stone, the kind that would fit perfectly in a cairn. My breath hitched. I slid off the bed and picked it up. It was cold and smooth in my hand, and carved into one flat side was a single, fresh tally mark. It was a message, a calling card. They were here in the hospital. They had followed me. They were watching me right now. The curtain rustled and I jumped, clutching the stone in my fist, hiding it. The doctor came in, a young, and with a weary smile and a stethoscope around his neck. "Hello," he said. Looking at his clipboard, "I understand you had a bit of a scare in the woods tonight." He began his examination, shining a light in my eyes, asking me to follow. His finger, all the while talking in a calm, reassuring voice about dehydration, about hypoglycemia, about the power of suggestion in isolated environments. I barely heard him. My entire being was focused on the stone in my hand, on the feeling of being watched. I could feel them just on the other side of the thin curtain, listening, smiling, waiting for him to leave, waiting for me to be alone again. The doctor finished, concluding that I was physically fine, just exhausted and dehydrated. He said a psychiatrist would come to speak with me in the morning for an evaluation that they wanted to keep me for. Observation overnight, observation so they could watch the crazy lady, make sure she didn't hurt herself. He left and the nurse came back. She told me they were moving me to a room on the 3rd floor, a quiet room just for observation. Helped me into a wheelchair, a policy for patients who were a risk, and pushed me out of there into an elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime, and we were alone in the sterile, mirrored box. I looked at our reflection. The tired nurse and the wild-eyed, dirty woman in the wheelchair. And then I saw it reflected in the polished metal of the elevator doors, a third figure, standing right behind me, a small child in a yellow raincoat, her face a pale smudge, her smile a dark slash. I gasped, whipping my head around, but there was nothing there, just the empty elevator. The nurse looked down at me. "You okay, honey?" she asked, just a little dizzy. I whispered, my voice trembling. The elevator dinged and the doors opened onto a dark, quiet hallway, the 3rd floor. The nurse pushed me out, the wheels squeaking on the polished floor. The hallway was long, with rooms on either side. Most of the doors were closed. The lights were dimmed for the night. It was silent to silent, kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. She pushed me to a room at the very end of the hall, room 307. She helped me into the bed, told me to get some rest, that someone would be by to check on me soon, and then she left, closing the door behind her with a soft final click, and I was alone in a dark, quiet hospital room, and I knew, with a certainty that was colder than the sheets, that I was not alone at all. The game was still on. It was their turn. The click of the door was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a definitive punctuation mark sealing me into the sterile white tomb. The silence of the room was absolute, a vacuum that pressed in on my eardrums after the constant noise of the woods and the air. The only light came from a faint glow under the door, and the pale green numbers of the clock on the wall. 3:07 a.m. Of course it was, the numbers of my room. A little joke from them, a sign that they owned this space as much as they owned the woods. I lay perfectly still in the narrow hospital bed, the sheets stiff and starched against my skin. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure it could be heard out in the hall. I still clutched the river stone in my hand, the single tally mark, a rough ridge under my thumb. my only anchor to the reality of what had happened, the only proof I had left that I wasn't insane. I listened so hard my head ached, straining for any sound, the hum of the heating vent, the distant beep of a machine, the creak of a floorboard, anything, but there was nothing, just that heavy, waiting silence. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity, the clocks flipping, but the soft, mechanical snick that made me jump every time I tried to formulate a plan, to think of what to do when the sun came up, when the psychiatrist arrived. But my thoughts were slippery, fractured. All I could see was the little girls smile. All I could hear was the wet, grinding breath of the thing in the dark. They had me. They had cornered me in the one place I was supposed to be safe, and they had made me look like a lunatic, my word against the clean, empty reality of my car in this white, quiet room. A sob caught in my throat, a helpless, hopeless sound that I choked back, afraid that any noise would summon them, and then I heard it, a new sound. So faint I thought I was imagining it at first, a soft rhythmic scratching, like a fingernail on metal. It was coming from the wall behind my head, from the headboard of the bed. I held my breath, my entire body rigid. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. It wasn't random, it was a pattern, one long scrape, pause to short scrapes. Pause, one long scrape, over and over, a code, a message. I knew what it was. It was a tally. They were counting, marking the wall, marking me. The sound was maddening. It seemed to get inside my skull, vibrating in my teeth. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears, but it was no use. The sound wasn't coming through my ears anymore. It was in my mind, a psychic scratching that I felt more than heard, and with it came the pressure, the same immense, ancient presence from the woods. It filled the room. Weight so heavy I felt the bed frame groan under it. The temperature dropped suddenly, plummeting from stuffy warmth to a bone-deep cold that made my breath bloom in the greenish dark. The voice, the thing, it didn't speak words this time. It didn't need to. It poured its meaning directly into my consciousness, a flood of images and sensations. I saw endless dark, a cold stone embrace deep underground. I felt a loneliness so vast and ancient it made my human life seem like the blink of an eye, and I felt a hunger, a desperate gnawing hunger for warmth, for light, for the sound of a living heart beating. It wanted company, it wanted servants to walk the world above and find others, to bring them down into the quiet dark, to play, to stay forever. And it had chosen me. It had tasted my fear and my defiance, and had found me interesting, a new toy for its collection. The scratching on the wall grew louder, more frantic, and I heard other sounds now. Soft footsteps in the hall, padding past my door, not the crisp click of nurses' shoes, but a barefoot, shuffling gait, and then a giggle, the little girl's wet, gurgling giggle right outside my door. The handle on the door began to jiggle ever so slightly, turning a fraction of an inch one way, then the other, as if someone was playing with it, testing it. The pressure in my head increased, the voice of the thing becoming a command, a single compelling urge. Open the door, and let them in. Let them in, and it would all be over. The fear would end, the cold would stop. I would be part of the family, part of the quiet, smiling world under the mountain. My body moved without my consent. my legs swinging out from under the stiff sheets. My bare feet hitting the icy cold linoleum floor, I stood up, a marionette pulled by strings of fear and despair. I took a step towards the door, then another. The scratching in the wall was a frenzied applause now urging me on. The door handle stopped jiggling and instead a small, pale finger hooked itself around the edge of the door, pulling it open just a crack, just enough to show a sliver of the dark hallway beyond, and in that sliver I saw a single dark eye peering in at me, blinking slowly, and below it the curve of a wide, stretched smile opened the door. The thing in my head commanded, its voice a soothing, seductive whisper now, a lover's promise. In the game, come home, my hand reached out, trembling, reaching for the handle. My fingers were inches from the cold metal when they brushed against the pocket of my discarded jeans hanging over the chair next to the bed, and I felt a hard, familiar shape. The emergency whistle. I had put it in my pocket after I threw it, a useless, empty gesture, but it was there. My fingers closed round it, and a spark of the old defiance, the last ember of the person I used to be, flared to life. No, the thought was weak, a whisper against a hurricane, but it was mine. No, I spun around, away from the door, away from the eye in the crack, and I ran for the window. The only other way out. The thing in my head roared in fury, pressure spiking into a blinding pain that made me cry. Out, the door flew open behind me, banging against the wall. I didn't look back. I could hear them coming in, their soft, shuffling footsteps, their wet, eager breathing. I reached the window, my fingers scrambling for the latch. It was locked, of course it was, a safety feature. The little girl giggled right behind me now. I could smell the damp earth and decay on her. I turned, putting my back to the window. The whistle held out in front of me like a crucifix. They were all there, the man, the woman in the pioneer dress, the teenager, the little girl. They filled the small room, their smiles wide and hungry in the gloom, their eyes black and depthless. They took a step forward in unison, perfectly coordinated movement. I was trapped, cornered, the window at my back. Them in front of me, the thing in the mountain whispering its rage and its desire into my mind. This was it. The end. The little girl reached out her hand towards me, her small, cold fingers just inches from my face. I did the only thing I had left. I brought the whistle to my lips and I blew. I blew with every last shred of my soul, with every memory of light and warmth in a world that made sense. The sound was a physical force in the small room, a shrieking wall of noise that made the air vibrate. The smiling people recoiled, screaming. Their hands clapped over their ears, their forms distorting, flickering like a bad signal. Pain in my head vanished, the ancient presence withdrawing with a roar of frustrated fury that I felt more than heard. The window behind me shuddered in its frame. I turned, with the whistle still screaming its piercing note. I slammed the hard plastic of its body against the glass once, twice. On the third hit, the window pane cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading out from the point of impact. I hit it again and again, and the glass gave way, shattering outward into the cold night air. The alarm on the window immediately began to blare aloud. siren that joined the shrill scream of the whistle, lights outside began to flash. Emergency lights. The hallway outside my room erupted with noise, shouts, running footsteps. The smiling family writhed in the center of the room, dissolving into shadows, melting away into the corners and under the bed, vanishing before my eyes as the real world came crashing back in. The door burst open. A security guard and two nurses stood there, their faces shocked and alarmed. They saw me at the darkness beyond, and I saw her one last time, the little girl standing on the lawn outside, her yellow raincoat glowing under the emergency lights. She wasn't smiling anymore. She just looked at me, her head tilted, and she raised her hand, not in a wave, holding up two fingers. Then she pointed at me, and then she pointed down at the ground too. The message was clear. The count was 2. I was the second thing it had wanted tonight. But I had gotten away. The game wasn't over. I had just postponed my turn, and somewhere out there in the dark, someone else was already lost, already playing, and the thing in the mountain was still hungry, and it was still waiting, and it knew my name.